Okay. Hi everyone, welcome along to DigiShift 58. So today's topic is open working and reuse. We're joined from people from the Catalyst, Third Sector Lab, SCDO Digital, and also Citizens Advice Scotland. We're going to be exploring working in the open and how best to use digital tools and approaches that have proven successful elsewhere. And we're going to explore quite a few different things, particularly actually of interest today. A lot of stuff from that kind of Catalyst ecosystem that we talk about, particularly service recipes. If you've not heard of those before, we'll talk about those a wee bit today. We're going to be joined by Jo Morfee, who's a producer at the Catalyst. She's going to be talking about how they work in the open, some of the techniques to do that, and I guess some of the principles that underpin it. We're also going to be joined by George Eckton from Citizens Advice Scotland, who's going to be talking about some of the big changes they've made to their systems and the no-code approach that they've taken to doing that, and some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of that experience. I'm going to start with you, Jo, if that's okay. And we don't have any slides. Nobody's got any slides today. We're going to keep it quite relaxed. We're going to have a chance for lots of questions and discussions. Just to say as well, these two kind of concepts, sometimes when you talk about them, I kind of find it feels weird, like why have these two things been mashed together? Why are we talking about open working and reuse in the same space? And what I guess I'd like us to kind of think about today is that reuse can't really work without there being a principle of open working in the third sector. So we can't unearth those amazing best practices of using digital tools without people working in the open and sharing that stuff transparently, and moving away from these really happy-clappy case studies that happen 2 years down the line after you've deployed something. Everything's wonderful, and there's a picture of you with the minister and some young people on a smartphone. But actually, what did that look like? How much did it cost? What was the pain of going through that process? What did you actually change? And that's some of the stuff that we're going to explore today. So I'll hand over to you, Jo, and then we'll hand over to George, and then we'll get kind of questions as a group rather than doing it individually.
Thanks, Ross. Because we haven't, I feel weird because we've not done a check-in. Because within Catalyst, every event or meeting that we do, we ask everyone to like check in, like say who they are, what organisations from, how they might be feeling today.
You do it.
Yeah, well, I've not got a sense of who's in the room, so it would be really lovely if you want to use the chat. Sorry, Ross, to jump on your off the back of your intro, which was a beautiful introduction, by the way. I loved it. But yeah, it'd be really nice to hear from you and like where you work and maybe how you're doing today. And can I get a quick show of hands, like who is working in the open already, just so I know sort of where to pitch this? Is anyone, are you all, oh, there's a bit of a, you can do that if you're kind of doing it. If you are, hand up. Okay, so like a bit of mostly this. Okay, that's good to know. That's really helpful. Well, obviously, as Ross said in the introduction, I work for Catalyst. Many of you may have come across our work previously or be aware of it on the periphery, or even be involved in our network. I hope that you are in some way, shape or form. Thanks, Ross, for sharing that link. When I joined Catalyst, I only joined in December, and I came from a social enterprise, which I set up and founded 5 years ago, called Innovate Her, which was all about getting more girls and women involved in the tech sector, because you may or may not be aware, you probably all are aware, that there is a diversity challenge within technology at the moment. And the reason I mention that is because we didn't work in the open at Innovate Her. We were very much the scenario that Ross just described, where we would launch something and say, oh, it's brilliant, all the teenage girls are using our tech solution now, but we never really spoke about how we got to that point. And since joining Catalyst, I've seen the value in open working, and it's really changed my view on how we should approach tech solutions and how we should share everything. So I now find myself being quite passionate about this as a subject, and I'm really excited to share some thoughts with you today. So I've only been with Catalyst, as I say, since September, and the way that we work is very non-hierarchical, or we aspire to work. Ross may contradict me on some of this. We aspire to work in a non-hierarchical, non-traditional way. And that means working collectively as a network in a fully participatory way. And we've just actually concluded a co-budgeting experiment where or we're about to conclude that experiment where the network themselves actually decided where to deploy funding and resources for the next round of funding, which was really exciting and very open as a process. But I'm not going to talk about that today because we're still synthesizing what we've learned from that. But that's one example of something that we've been trying out that's hugely exciting and working in a very participatory way. But generally, across the whole of the Catalyst network, we do encourage open working, and there are many reasons for this. Obviously, it facilitates better communication. So when you're running a network, it's and the next level from running an organization, which is where I just came from, because there are many more actors and people across many different organizations spread all across the country, indeed even the world. We've had some people from Canada came to our last meetup to share what they're doing, and our network is growing all the time. So the information flow through the network becomes probably one of the most critical and important things that we need to facilitate as a core team of producers. And there are only 3 of us. So it's quite a challenge to make sure that information from one side of the network gets to the other and that people are learning from one another in a really helpful way, because obviously everybody's time poor as well. So it's a question of not only how does the information flow, but what is the right amount of information that people need to be able to learn from one another and grow and develop themselves. So we've started out, and Ross and others have been part of this experiment in terms of we've started out trying to get people to share what they're doing regularly. So Jo Roberson, who's a freelancer who works with us on content and marketing mostly at the moment, he started facilitating weekly week note sessions, which members of the network who run initiatives for us can attend every Thursday for just 30 minutes and try and draft and write a blog post. Now, it is a challenge to write a blog post in 30 minutes. I don't know if any of you have ever tried it. I know that Ross, you have, and you've been successful. Thank you. And some of your blog posts have been wonderful. So we'll share some of those in the chat afterwards. But we found that these weekly sessions have just been really, really helpful for giving people a nudge and a bit of a space to think about sharing what they've done that week. And it doesn't have to be war and peace. It can be really simple and like bullet point format. The idea of a week note is that it's easy to digest. It can be on any topic, anything at all, anything you've learned that week that's of value or anything that you want to share. And what we found is that by creating that space for people to come together, people are networking in that brief amount of time too. They're learning about each other's work and they're publishing regularly. And that's the key. And they're often quite short posts, which is actually what we want because, like I said before, people are time poor. So we found that that's been really effective. We've been trialing that, I'd say, maybe the last two months or so, and it's something that we plan to continue. Now, obviously, the tool that we're using there is Medium, which is the normal sort of like blog platform that most people use. You could do it on LinkedIn, but we are also thinking about other formats. So what's interesting when you start to explore how accessible is the information that you're sharing is that formats are key. So we're also looking at doing some podcasts and maybe some videos going forward so that we can cover more bases and more needs in terms of how people digest this information, because quite often the written word can be inaccessible for some people. So that's one technique we've been trying. And obviously recording learning really helps us to assimilate it, because I don't know about you, but when I've gone through a tech project, unless I have written kind of like a journal or some notes on what's gone on week by week, by the time I get to the end, it's just all a blur. And it's like, okay, we've launched this product, but what actually happened there? And quite often, you know, you're up against it. It's a tight time scale. You've got to launch the product or the service quickly. So the learning can get lost. So these working in the open can really help you, you know, in terms of yourself, look back at how you dealt with certain things and what you learned from it. And also in terms of funding applications, it's really, really great content to be able to say, like, here's some links on what we learned from last time. Will you repeat fund this, or will you fund the next iteration of it, etc. So it's just great evidence, really. What else have we been doing? Well, we've been dismantling hierarchy, I would say, through this working openly. And that's another passion of ours collectively as a team, because what usually happens is within organizations, people at senior levels there's often like some mystery around the work that you do. And in terms of like people at junior levels are looking, thinking, what are they actually doing, you know, as a role? And it can block people in terms of their growth and development if they don't understand as well. You know, it's not very inclusive to not understand what your manager does or what their manager does. So working in the open, particularly for senior people in organizations, can just help demystify what it is that you do and remove some of those barriers to progression, I think. What else can I talk about? Oh, service recipes, Ross, you mentioned. So yeah, that's a great example of what Catalyst has supported that's really exploded actually. There's currently about 80 service recipes. I'll share the link to it when I finish speaking. Oh, thank you, Ross. You're like my helper today. Shanae Tromp from CAST leads the service recipes initiative at the moment, and like I say, there's about 80 up there, and these are all ingredients, which is why we call them recipes, for a successful service or product that charities have shared. So it's very open, and it's charities that have gone through the process of developing something, and generally charities share the very similar needs. It doesn't kind of matter who they're serving, but if they're developing a technological product or solution, it'll tend to have the same principles or ingredients within it. So the idea is that by sharing these recipes, charities can learn from one another, or indeed anyone in the social sector, not just charities, and therefore save time, save money, and also not have to get repeat funding time and again for basically what is a very similar solution. So funders really, really like this aspect to the work that we do at Catalyst. It's a huge part of their agenda now to share more openly in terms of not just like the code base, but IP as well. So something that we're exploring at the moment, we're taking some external advice on, is open IP for funding agreements and how we work with funders to make sure that things like that can be shared, but also there's a legal framework around it. And data is a big challenge for us. So we're currently taking some advice on that too, how we can share data openly across the network without breaching GDPR, which almost seems impossible, but we are taking on advice on how we might approach that, because it seems really important if we're going to be working in the open that we can share key data points on what's worked and what hasn't worked. Not necessarily any identifying data on any individual, but just key data points. So open IP and data are the main challenges for us at the moment in terms of working in the open. And finally, I'm not sure how much time I've got, but I'll just wrap up now, Ross, so that I'm not rambling too much. I would say, okay, good. I would say that it requires discipline. So that's a major challenge. I mean, even for myself, I've stopped writing week notes for a couple of months because I've had a lot going on personally. I think it can be really difficult to keep the momentum going, which is why those weekly sessions that I mentioned are brilliant for that. And it does link to reuse, as Ross said. I mean, there's not one without the other, really. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what George has to say on that, because they are extrinsically linked, and you can't reuse software without having open principles embedded within that. And I think that from working in past organizations, I've noticed that if you're an organization in a competitive mindset or a scarcity mindset, this is not possible. So it's all about the mindset that you're in, really. If you're in a collaborative, collective, one of our values is collectivism. If you're in that space, then you're obviously more likely culturally to work openly and collaborate with others. But if you're in a scarcity mindset, you won't want to share IP or your secret to success. I haven't seen as much of that within the social sector, but I've seen it more in the private sector, and it's really not conducive to fostering partnerships, collaborative working, or working openly. So, I mean, obviously the aim of working openly is that we can all benefit from each other and not make the same mistakes, nurture each other's growth and development, and collaborate more, really. And I think that is where I'll leave it. Is that okay, Ross?
Brilliant. Thank you, Jo. That was really good. Maybe a lot of clap. Thanks, Siobhan. We're going to hear from George, and then what we'll do is we'll come back for questions and discussions. I'll keep resources going in the chat. George has really helpfully put a link to an overview of some of the work that he's going to be talking about. So if you want to kind of read that at your own time, or you want to share it with anyone, you can do that as well. George, I'll hand over to you, and then we'll get a chance for kind of open discussion and questions.
Yeah, it's all there and probably said a lot more eloquently by others than I'm just about to demonstrate. But I think we have worked in the open. It's been a funded project, so in that regard, we've always published updates about what we're doing, invited people's opinions, sort of shown where we're going and what we're trying to do. I think we started off with an ethos that I was reading the book on the holidays and was thinking about how you demonstrate Nocode, and actually, bear with me, but how techno, the dance music, got its name was from a book called The Third Wave, and they talk about techno rebels, and their whole ethos, I thought, actually summed up Nocode better than I've been able to do to any form of medium or group so far. And it's that they contended that technology need not be big, costly, or complex in order to be sophisticated. I think we've seen the process of sophistication here is through co-design, co-production, and co-creation across our network. We've long held that we wanted to make our advice as local as possible from a collective entry point, and that was even before the pandemic. But as with technology and sort of mindsets, everyone always thought that technology meant doing things once and well and centrally. And through the CivTech process, we were determined to turn that on its head. So currently, our call center, when you access a no-code AI system married up with Twilio, takes you to your most local bureau. So our call center is our network, because we contend that advice is best served by communities, within communities, and for communities, to not sound too much like Tony Blair in a soundbite. But that is what really makes our network special, and we weren't about digital transformation. Our unique selling point since the war as a network of organizations has been face-to-face advice in communities. Now, we're all for digitization internally and externally in terms of service, but there always comes time from a well-being perspective when you want to be face-to-face with someone. Now, in the modern era, that can be over this medium, but also sometimes that kind of well-being input is best delivered in a room with people, and hopefully as we get out of the pandemic, it's going to be more of the case. I think we'd previously tried to search the market to work for something that would work for us in that way. So almost an inverted call center. And there wasn't really anything out there. There was various bits and bobs, but there was nothing that really fitted the ethos of our organization. So it was quite interesting to sort of say to people, we're going to go into a procurement journey, and I have no idea what we're going to procure, but we're all quite clear what we don't want, and we're all quite clear what we do want. So I think this process will actually be quite good for us. So we went through that CivTech process. It was really good. We're probably a larger charity, so it was easier for us to do, I would contend. And what we've delivered, I think, is more around the process. I think the innovation is actually doing things, nicking stuff, being like those techno rebels, and basically stripping stuff down, reusing them for the purpose of getting a better outcome. I don't think we've done high-end innovation as a network. We're working with Abertay University and others to look at how you can update automatically via machine learning websites. This was nowhere near that end of the spectrum. This was us cobbling around to say, we need to get better at these things, and there's stuff out there. Let's use a process that actually that is innovative for us as a network, that will get us closer to where we want to, and ultimately as well. Because although I'm from the right side of the Pennines in Lancashire, I'm still a northerner and quite tight. It is about, we are in a constrained funding environment. We need to do things quickly. We also haven't got a lot of cost. And also I'm trying to put into place a thought where we impact assess beforehand. How much technological debt do we wish to carry as an organization if you invest in certain things? And Nocode, in that kind of modular, almost like Thunderbirds 2, allows you to pick things up and drop things down if they go out of fashion, or they're too costly, or a better product comes on. And we found that to be, really good. it's been a really good internal sieve process for us to look at from a procurement perspective. Is there something that we could compromise on? So we'll get 85% of what we want. It wouldn't be 100% if we had a bespoke solution, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Are we okay with that? And that's been really positive for us. I think we have not gone into things that have then left us on the hook for quite costly maintenance or can't be swapped out at a future date. And through that process, we've got an AI system for our phone. We've worked in terms of a corporate social responsibility way with Poly AI. We've believed in more investment by being open to being a test bed for others, but they need to be an ethical organization for our sort of service principles and policies, but that can lever in more investment. We've looked at secure uploads into our client record management system via the no-code approach, chatbots, reusing dialogue flow, translation, signable. And, a signable solution across a network for us would be transformational. It might never actually appear to the client. It probably will in terms of signing consent forms, but actually internally that will be transformational for us in the reuse of what's already there. As Ross was saying at the start, not everything in the garden's rosy. I would flag up that probably one of the things that we've really struggled with when reusing tech, especially as we start to break down the EU and the UK GDPR, is that quite a lot of the no-code tools or low-code tools out with kind of Microsoft's internal environment kind of apps that you can tweak their existing programs and software, is that they're located in the US. So if you want more functionality, you've got to transfer or store data potentially out with that zone, or from a training and learning and development perspective and that kind of open learning that Jo was talking about previously, you've got to turn that off, saying Google Dialogflow, in order to be able to comply with your requirements. And I think that's something that really is an issue, probably an issue for everyone, but especially for the voluntary sector and smaller charities, in that no code's great, but I think we just all need to be careful around how much functionality you can see in and out. And when you actually go into it, they say, well, you can only have all that functionality from a no-code perspective if it's stored on the eastern seaboard of the United States. So I think I think they're secure. I think more the issue from a cyber perspective, what colleagues written in the chat, it's that split between cyber and information governance. You can have some very big companies who have got a very secure firewall offering you something, but they're not offering you up how they're going to govern and use their data in a territory that isn't of adequacy to UK GDPR. So, but I'm not here to talk about that aspect today. It was just to flag up that I think that is one of the potential barriers for a great use of no codes, but hopefully with that rollout, more and more will come into the EU and UK market, and that'll be a way of working quickly. So happy to take any questions in terms of what we've delivered. Hopefully that's a quick whiz through sort of a process rather than an actual product delivery of innovation and reuse of others.
Brilliant, thank you, George. That was really good. Thank you. And I'm sure loads of people will have questions about what that's looked like in your organisation. So I'm going to open it up. If anyone's got any questions, just either for Jo or for George, and we can have an open discussion. It's quite a small room today, so stick your hand up or use the virtual hand up, and we'll get cracking. So anyone want to go first? Okay. When you go, Ross.
Sorry, yeah, I was looking for the hand function there. I'm a Teams person. Sorry, it's been a while since I've seen them. You made that sound really easy, George. All of that actually, this gets scarily easy. Yeah, it was really just to say, like, I mean, obviously, I work for Insure Council, and I suppose it's got a large workforce as well. One of the sort of things I find when we're trying to make changes to products or kind of services, software, is there's a lot of different teams you have to go to for that kind of thing. And when you were sort of approaching this kind of stuff, did you have to go through a lot of different phases for that, or did you find it was just because of where people were in certain teams, it just kind of fell into place for you?
Yes, we're quite a large organisation, but I think I started off in 2020 selling the idea. So we did comms first. It was, is this what you want? could we go about it in this process? This is how it would be done. Had a chat with head of IT and said, look, we'll come to you at certain points from a technological perspective, but actually this is service design. So I'm going to be coming to you, and not for you to say no. I want the answer to be, how can we do this? Okay, I'm giving you enough time. We're stacking this in a way that it should be about communication, service design. It's not about necessarily the technical stuff. We need to do the impact assessments and that, but it was really about getting the process going. And we've got a co-design policy, a co-creation policy across CAS. So it's how we'll actually work with our members and with our teams in CAS and in our member bureaus to design major projects. And that's what we follow. And so that's very much for anything, whether it doesn't really touch IT, if it's about how we deliver the next tranche of funding to address sort of young people's poverty, that's how we'll do it. If it's tech, this is how we'll do it. And so that really does clear quite a lot of the barriers up front. We're also very active, Ross, in engaging people. So, you know, when we were trying to pick the empathetic voice for the AI system, that wasn't me in a room going, I like that. We surveyed the whole staff and got them engaged, and then said, right, we're going to set up a little system on an internal test bed. Can you try it? Tell us how it is. Can you get it to work? Does it not work for your accent? Had that chat and actually got people engaged, and then they really saw the benefits of it as well, and that we got everyone's opinion in that sense as to it's not just a technical thing. Everyone's opinion was valid. It brought buy-in across the organization. And so, you know, even when you hit bumps in the road, people are like, right, well, this is great. You know, we've at least done this. We can work around this. There was fostered that very positive attitude is really helpful at the start of any process.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, it's good hearing people's sort of experiences of things like that come through. So it makes it quite clear. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Ross. Yeah, I think, I mean, George's point there that, you know, what CAS had, and probably all of you have, is a design problem, not a digital problem. And I think that's where sometimes, particularly maybe the no-code stuff, can be problematic, is people are trying to shoehorn a solution that seems really good into a thing where it might not actually be the right thing for the problem, and actually spending that time understanding the problem and speaking to both your users and those staff before you kind of embark on that journey. And we had Tom Loosemore on, I think, was it the last one, Maddie, or was it the one before that last one? And he was talking about the starting point with any of the organisations or governments that he's working with is trying to figure out, like, what's the biggest pain point internally for staff? Where is there one where it's actually relatively small and doesn't feel technologically complicated, and using that as a starting point to solve? So we're thinking about, like, where might you make use of one of the recipes or a no-code tool when you're working internally with staff or volunteers, and you know that there's that recurring problem. It could be like timesheets, or, you know, something that feels fairly mundane, but actually being able to understand that, use a design process and deploy something quickly to solve it means you're going to get buy-in for those more difficult things, like changing the way that helpline works. Any other questions? Siobhan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what you just said, that ability to move quickly. And I think one of the things that stops people moving quickly is just how many no-code tools there are, and they just get totally overwhelmed and don't know how to choose them. So then pulling that together with what George was saying about we're limited by GDPR and what we can use to its full potential here. Is there something in there about having some sort of database of no-code tools that work really well in the UK, and then that helps people narrow down their selection and look at those first, and then we can really support each other because we're all using the same no-code tools?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't know, Jo, if you want to come in with that in terms of the recipes, but I think, I mean, there's something in that. I think, like, a lot of the recipes flag up things where there's potential, like, I hate using the term red flags, but things that, you know, so it could be safeguarding or it could be GDPR. And I kind of wonder, like, in the future with recipes, it's like there's probably going to be standard things that come up time and time again in the third sector that we really need to consider. And it's like, how do you bring that to the forefront of the recipe so that at a glance I can look and go, well, actually, there's a bit of a risk in that. Because I think, like, a nice example is actually like Bernardo's during the pandemic choosing to use WhatsApp because that's what young people told them what to use. But they also knew that actually we were breaking the terms and conditions of WhatsApp because we were engaging with young people who shouldn't have been on WhatsApp in the first place. But they took a calculated risk in doing that. And so there's a difference between like breaking the terms and conditions of a commercial provider versus breaking the law in the UK, and it's getting charities to understand they're not the same thing. Jo, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I think you covered it quite well there, Ross, but I would say that we're using a no-code tool at Catalyst for our website, Webflow, and we have run into some difficulties with it ourselves, because in terms of when you do want to add some functionality, features, or anything like that, it's really hard to find a developer that will touch it at all, because that's not the point of it. And so it's quite limited. And I think it's a brilliant solution in theory, but there are, the importance of us all sharing, as Ross has said, through recipes and through working in the open, the challenges that we have with these tools, it's increasingly important, because I think you can quite easily stumble into a no-code solution and then realize that it's not right for you because you actually need some bespoke features. So just wanted to add that, really.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. George has put just in the chat there about committing to write a short no-code playbook for CivTech 6 challenge. So that'd be interesting. We can share that with people when that comes out. That's really good.
I was going to put in the chat as well, it might be helpful for SCBO colleagues if, drawing up a list of, I think the issues from a GDPR perspective was, so if you're using Twilio, if you're using Melissa, where in terms of international data transfers, post the European court ruling that broke the privacy shield with the US and therefore quite a lot of the big tech companies. And it's not just no code. It could be the use of quite a lot of software that is quite bespoke and regularly used across the voluntary sector. And just that level of awareness of where you have to tell clients you're putting their data and what you have to go through and where you have to look. So like, I think it's live chat, another form of chat technology, quite clear that it's in Dallas, Texas. Google, I think, is East Coast. Meta won't tell you anywhere. And even having that to flag a top list of software, not just no code, I think could be incredibly helpful for charities from falling foul of where they put data. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think as well, Jo, sorry, you were going to.
As I mentioned earlier, we're working on a data sharing agreement for the network. I wonder if, obviously we'll be doing that openly, so we'll share what we find. We're taking some advice on it, because there is a general principle here that the challenge is, in sharing the data amongst, many organizations. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, just before we bring Susan in for a question, I think there maybe is some scope for like there being a kind of primer for charities who are wanting to use off-the-shelf or no-code tools. Like, here's the big questions you need to ask about GDPR and data storage. I actually don't know if that really exists somewhere, where it's kind of charity sector specific. But I mean, there's maybe some stuff out there about commercial sector which would apply to charity sector as well. Susan, you were going to come.
Hi. Yeah, it's a question for Jo, really. I usually come to these events not really from a digital perspective. I think one of the things that's really useful about these DigiShifts is that there's lots of things you can learn for other elements of your work, not just for digital development. So I was just wondering if you've got examples of organizations that are really successfully using open working, not in relation to tech, in relation to other things.
That's a great question. I think actually Pauline shared Hira Hussain's example in the chat. She's a good friend of mine. Whilst some of the open working that her organisation employs is relating to their platform, which is volunteer-led, she also works openly around things like developing her strategy. So I'd really check out her blog post. I'll see if I can dig it out now on how they developed that as a collective, and they included volunteers and beneficiaries and everyone in that process. And I really enjoyed personally following that journey. So that's one example that does come to mind that's been shared in the chat too. But I'll have a think of others that are not tech related and post a few more in the chat for you, because there's so many examples, there's so much inspiration out there. And it doesn't all just have to be relating to tech. It's such a good point, because you can apply these principles to anything. And when I first joined the team at Catalyst, actually, I'll share the blog post I wrote about us developing our values as a core team, which is obviously a cultural piece, But again, the tools and techniques that we applied to develop values, anybody could use. So and it makes a big difference to team culture. So I'll share that too as a non-tech example.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking very much from a climate change point of view, because voluntary organisations are really struggling with how they can respond to net zero and how they can decarbonise their operations. And what they're really desperate for is some advice and guidance on how to do that. Yeah, but it's really difficult.
You should have a coffee or a chat, Susan, because we've got some from the lottery, from the Growing Great Ideas Fund, which I think they're now strategically reviewing and potentially not going to offer in future, which is a real shame because it's an experimental fund. And we've got a small kind of strand of that, which is focusing on climate change. And we were wondering like how to approach that and how to commission some work. So I'd love to have a chat with you about that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just a couple of things I've put in the chat. So there's the Open Working Toolkit, which we developed as part of the Catalyst. So that's got a kind of framework for working open, so kind of key principles, ways to do it, some examples. It's got really nice templates that you can use for week notes. So if as an organisation or even as a small team you're thinking about doing it, that's basically a blueprint for doing it as well. The book that I would recommend, so the Agile Comms Handbook, and Giles has done a DigiShift before. Really good book, which kind of explains this stuff in plain English. That's really useful as well. I've also put a link in. We're doing an open working program at the moment as part of the Catalyst. We've got an 8-week program, which we're in the middle of right now. And it's, so there's, I think, 7 of the kind of main Scottish funders. So everyone from kind of RS McDonald to kind of Lottery in Scotland. And we're working with their grant holders. We've got a cohort of about 20 people in that at the moment. So if you click one of the medium links that I've just put in the chat, there's a bunch of Scottish charities working in open right now. And what I would say is obviously like they're very new to it, so kind of some of their approaches are very different. They're kind of finding their feet. But that program, we've got Giles has run a masterclass in it. We've done like a writing for the web workshop, and we've spoken about. I think this is really important, like using Twitter threads to do this stuff as well. I think like people sometimes get a bit fixated on like open working needs to be have a blog and it's like classic kind of government digital service. We write week notes. But actually it can be whatever's going to work for your organisation. The one that I actually really like is there's a financial inclusion project in Scotland for survivors of economic abuse. And so Robin, who works on that, has been really successfully, she's part of the programme as well. She's been using Twitter threads to work in the open, and she does it really well. So I think it's like trying to find what's going to work for your organisation and going with that and not being fixated on like there's only one way of doing it. Personally, I think week notes in the classic sense can be a bit self-indulgent, and I am very skeptical of what the audience is for them, because it's like you writing out a diary of what you've just done. That's great for maybe like your team of 12 people, but like what's the audience beyond that? And so for me, I think like where some of those Scottish charities have done it well and where she's done it, and like Cassie's example actually that Jo's just put in, is like they're talking. You know, it might be that there's like a piece of research that's come out this week. How does that impact what we're doing and reflect what we're trying to do as an organisation? Or, you know, something's just been debated in the Scottish Parliament. Does that actually reflect what our users experience? And it's those things that give it the kind of readability, and you're still working in the open, but you also need to think of it as there actually an audience for this stuff as well. I think that's sometimes the bit that's missing from open working for me. Pauline, you were going to come in.
Yeah, I'm sort of I'm planning to start this new project, and using week notes is going to be one of my key strategies, because I want people to see what I'm doing. So I need to think about what you said, Ross, and you know I agree to some extent. I'm starting, I think, from a very low base, and I'm also going to be working from a proposal that we could be commissioned to do, but from the council. So they're going to have a view of what we should or shouldn't be doing as well. But I think there's a certain amount of investment in my previous experience, and that I'm being trusted to some extent to get on with it. I've used this book, Lou Downs' Good Services, which has been recommended elsewhere, and like a lot of the learning that I've done has been from the public sector as well, and going to on conferences and stuff like that. And some of them are starting to happen again, like the local government digital is happening in Birmingham in September. Comms Camp is happening again in Bradford in September, I think, or November. So talking to other people and getting involved with other people has been a key learning area for me. The resources that Jo has shared in the chat and yourself have been are brilliant, and like I feel like a lot of my questions have been answered already, but I also feel very isolated because I feel like I'm one of the few people in Birmingham to be talking about this. And yeah, I need some advice about how to kind of not feel isolated, not get burned out before I even start.
Thanks, Pauline. Jo or George, either of you want to take the honour both?
In terms of advice, I think what we tried to ensure was very much that it was never, I was never a single point of failure. So we were very keen to have a group, and it didn't need to be experts, because I ain't an expert. My 12-year-old who sat behind there tells me how to use my iPhone. I think it more came from the avoidance of a groupthink sense. So I probably tried to bring the service design principles from previous in career, but not necessarily the tech, and then have a group of people who were all interested. And it was that was the point, that they were interested, and we would bump ideas around and support each other. So I know that's quite a basic thing to say, but having a group and getting people energized from the comms work that you do ahead of that was really important. It was a really good structure for us to have. We had some, times highs and lows, but it gained a good outcome in the end. And it was really just about having your own support network, but also that supportive challenge of, do we want to do it like that? Do we want to do it like this? And I think Andy from Side Labs, who's the Nocode agency that we work with, went on stage at CivTech6 and he goes, well, Jane and George were very clear about what they didn't want, which was quite unusual as a client, because we were, we just said, oh, this is what we don't want, but it was done in a mutually supportive way. So that would just be sort of well-being advice to you.
Thanks, George. That was really useful. Just before Jo comes in, Pauline, you've asked a question about comms strategy. I think there's a really interesting bit about in the Agile Comms handbook that kind of talks about and it sounds very throwaway, but you almost don't need a comms strategy for this stuff. What you need is permission. And this is the thing I found, so the open working stuff that we've done prior to this point, working with lottery funded groups, there wasn't almost nobody needed to be convinced who was part of that group. People technically understood how to execute it because it's not that tricky. And then once they got in the rhythm of it, it felt natural. The biggest sticking point was their bosses not really getting this stuff, or their bosses, I think Jo spoke a wee bit about this, their bosses thinking, well, everything we do is very precious and secret and we couldn't possibly talk about it in the open. And that for me is the big bit, is how do you get permission from someone senior who really gets this and champions it and lets you do it, rather than every time you do it you feel oh God, I don't know if my chief exec's going to like this. And that's where some of the open working stuff kind of ends up being a press release that's slightly different because someone's in a very scared way approached open working rather than actually embraced it in the way they should have. Jo, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those reflections from both you and George. I think it is a cultural piece. So before you get started, building your team, as George said, and getting people aligned around how you're going to work and the principles of how you're going to work is really important. And values, I did share my blog on that, but setting values, even as a project team, even if it's a temporary team coming together and then disbanding again, I think it's hugely important. So for example, I mentioned earlier, one of our values is collectivism, which enables this kind of working openly sort of vibe, I suppose. So it's setting that intention and that tone from the beginning. And also support. I really hear you saying that you need support, and we felt that too as a team. Like I said, I'm not getting week notes out regularly enough. So we procured Joe Roberson and his support has been massive, you know. So he facilitates our weekly week note sessions, like I said earlier, and really kind of keeps everyone motivated and on track. And he is a comms specialist, so we don't have a strategy. And I'd agree with Ross, I don't think that's needed. You just need a set of principles that underpin the work, and maybe a bit of support to keep everybody on track. Even if it doesn't need to be a comms specialist, it could just be someone saying, have you published something lately, you know, and giving everyone a nudge. So that would be all I would add there.
Yeah, that's really good. There's someone who's on our current open working programme, and the way that she's approached it is the charity's going through like a major website redesign process, and she's using open working and purely focusing on that. And part of the reason she's done it is she wants to really communicate to their supporters and their users, like, here's the changes we're making, here's how we made decisions, but also as a way of documenting to a senior team and to the board, like the board's not going, where's the website, what's happening with it? She can, like, that clarity of the week notes this week is actually we're doing user testing, or the next week we're testing this approach around content, or the next week we've worked with a group of young people to figure out this problem that we've got. And so working transparently and open has meant that she's getting buy-in from a really wide range of stakeholders for a process that often feels like it goes behind closed doors and then you present something to the board. And then I guess the onus is on that board or the senior team or those other people, whether they want to engage in that process and reading it. But there's no excuses because the thing's been done really openly and transparently. And I think if people are kind of struggling as to where to start, I think that's a really nice way of doing it. It could be like you've been given money for a new project, or you've got a website redesign, or you're launching your annual report. Those types of things can give it that initial focus and structure that sometimes it needs. Any other questions or thoughts from anyone else? Still got about 5 or so minutes left. Jo, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to write in the chat that what feels important to me is writing from the heart or speaking from the heart when you're working openly. It's very different to, you know, I've been in communications and comms for years and digital, and I used to write a whole range of corporate materials for various different companies. And it's very, very different, you know, having that corporate tone or having a press release tone to sort of writing a week note where it's vulnerable making and it does expose you a little bit. And for me, when I first came to it, I was like, oh, this feels really, you know, I had to decondition myself to thinking that I shouldn't be speaking about, you know, things that have gone wrong externally and publicly, like what are people going to think about it? But actually, you know, that vulnerability is where the learning is. And I would just say, like, just try and push through that and like really speak from your heart if you can do, and if you're enabled to do so by your organisation, then that's great.
Yeah, it's really good advice, Jo. Thank you. There was something came up in the last, so we do like a similar approach we kind of shamelessly stole from Jo, where we do kind of weekly half-hour sessions where people write because they've got that kind of fixed period of time. It gives people the focus. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do week notes this week and you put it off, and then eventually 4 p.m. on a Friday you might sneak it in, but you probably won't, and you might end up doing next week, and then you beat yourself up about it. It's giving yourself that fixed period of time. One of the things we spoke about in that was around tone of voice, and actually the kind of conclusion from the group was that a kind of corporate tone of voice applied to open working is deeply unhelpful, because part of the point of open working is you're getting the perspective of someone who's maybe a frontline staff worker and someone who's like a head of digital and then someone who's a chief exec. They're very different people with different perspectives, and the idea that they all have a singular tone of voice would be slightly ridiculous and probably kind of counter to what open working is trying to do. One of the things we did speak about within that, depending on what your organisation does, is like shared language, so that there's that kind of continuity. So some of the stuff that we've been doing at the moment, I've been working with Sally, who Maddie works with, around like drug deaths and homelessness in Scotland, is if you collectively as a team of people don't have the same shared language, you can veer off in quite dangerous tangents and talking about something that someone thinks you're talking about something completely different. But also when we're talking as a team, there's that clarity with each other what we're actually talking about. And so that's sometimes really useful. You don't need a corporate tone of voice, but you might say that as an organisation, we never talk about people who use drugs as X, Y, and Z. And you might collectively build that into how you do your open working, but that doesn't mean we all need to speak in the same way. That's quite different. Jo's been putting some really good links in the chat, so is George as well. Any other questions? I've got a question for people in the room. Oh, sorry, Siobhan, get yours first, and then I'll ask my question.
Sorry, my computer had a little fit there. I was just interested, Pauline said like about working in it openly and maybe doing some things that the council would be like a bit unsure of whether she should be doing. And then I'm wondering about kind of exploring that from the point of view of if you start to do your own development work, you're maybe doing stuff that your managers are kind of like, oh, why are you doing that? That's not your job. I wonder if you've come across any of that kind of backlash in your open working of people kind of picking at what you've said and, oh, why are you doing it this way? And then how did you handle that if you did?
Jo or George, either of you want to comment on that one? That's a really good question.
I don't know, I can give a really boring answer that I haven't really done.
Boring sometimes good.
On the basis of, I guess we invested in co-design. We really, really invested, made sure that we were open and transparent across the whole network, asked people to chip in, try to make it fun. You know, we test the bot or plant 100 trees. You know, fun and for a purpose. Everyone was wanting to contribute. It was, you know, a good laugh. Then that message board became, it took me 8 times to get through. By the end, I was, you know, various sweary emoji faces were there, but it made it fun. And, you know, we got morale out of it as well as that. But we, you know, we planned it. We'd always said that this was how we were going to do it. We were very clear that it was a collective thing. It wasn't, you know, I was leading it on the basis of actually getting it over the line. And the process, I wanted to do the process, I wanted open innovation. But the way the quid pro quo there was that we're going to take people with us. So that was a benefit, and that's been, you know, really helpful for us in terms of trying to avoid those issues.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think if you can convince one person in a senior team to do it as well alongside other people, I think that has a huge advantage, that it's not been done by a team of people where they're operating at a junior level and they're really enthusiastic, but actually they're operating with a bit of fear. And I think Jo's point is, like, you need to genuinely buy into this and genuinely be open, or it doesn't really work very well and it doesn't flow naturally either. I think we're going to maybe finish up now because it's 10:59. I'm going to say thank you so much to Jo and George. That was a really good discussion. Actually, having a small group today kind of lended itself really nicely to that. There's loads of good links. I think Maddie's going to send some of those out, but on the Catalyst website, there's things like the Open Working Toolkit. There's the Medium link that I shared about some of the kind of Scottish charities who are doing this stuff at the moment, if you're looking for inspiration, and also the kind of Catalyst blog as well. And go and look at the kind of Nocode resources and links to what CAS are doing that George shared as well. Thank you so much. We'll be back in August for our next DigiShift, which will be number 59, which is terrifying. I'll see you, hopefully see some of you soon. Catch you all later. Cheers, thank you, bye.